So I want you to imagine two pairs of words. Okay, the first is body and spirit, and the second is faith and works. Now, if I were going to take one from each category and put the words together, I think naturally I would put faith and spirit together, right? Spirituality is how we live out our faith. The words just naturally seem to work together. They're about the same sort of thing. And then put body and works together, because works, we mean like good works, and good works have to do with the body. James writes in this passage of our bodily needs. He talks about addressing the needs of hunger and clothing. Right? So body seems to me to go with works, and faith goes with spirit. And yet, there is this last verse in our James reading today. I'm going to take it out and look at it. It's right there at the end. It's verse 26. It says, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead." Now, remember your SAT analogies, people. In this grammatical construction, body does not go with works. Body is parallel to faith, right? And that makes spirit parallel to works. This may seem a little thing, like, so what? James put the words in a weird order. Does it really matter all that much? Well, I think now that we've noticed this little crack in this wall of text on page 2, we ought to examine it a little further. Peer in there. See what's hiding behind this verse. This past summer, I got to spend with Henry and Drew and Stephanie a day exploring the mountains around Silverton, Colorado, on a razor, which is like a ATV-esque thing. And we went way up in the valley outside of town, just zigzagging up these mountain roads, eventually just became pure rock. And we came to an abandoned mine way above the tree line. And there were huge piles of mine equipment all around, carts and twisted up track from carts and gears the size of the dining room table and bolts the size of my leg. And the boys and I had a great time exploring. We were climbing all over it. And then, like 20 or 30 minutes in, I noticed that on the face of the mountain, like the wall of rock, there was a little hole, a little crack. And I was curious, and so I walked over to it. And when I got there, I found myself standing in a gust of wind. It was like, at Home Depot in the summer when they're selling fans, and you walk down the aisle, and you're like, all of a sudden, it was like that, except the wind was very cold. And coming out of the hole. And I peered in there, but it's very dark inside the mountain, and I couldn't see anything. But a few minutes later, curiosity got the best of my claustrophobia, and I got down on my stomach, and I began to wiggle myself into this hole. And once I got my shoulders in and my eyes adjusted, I found myself, I found my upper myself in an enormous room. And there was all this other mine equipment in there, and these cages. It was this huge, cavernous space. It had been, I learned, the machine shop in the mine before the mine closed. And I think, in a similar way, there's something amazing to be found if we will poke our noggins in this crack in this verse from James, this weird spot, the part where he pairs body with faith and spirit with works. The first half of the analogy is about body and spirit. A body without spirit is dead. Crucially, the body can exist without the spirit. Anyone who's ever been to a wake or has been at the bedside of a loved one as they've died knows this is true. The body can exist, but it has to have the spirit to be alive. Here, it's probably helpful to remember that both in Hebrew and in Greek, but not in English, the word for spirit also means wind or breath. This is why in the Adam and Eve story, God takes the human being, the Adam he has made, and breathed into its nostrils the breath of life. That's the Spirit. That breath is what makes Adam alive. Breath is what makes the body go. Some of you may remember when John Madden was back doing telecasts, he would, after a long offensive drive, they'd pan to a shot of the sideline. You'd have these offensive linemen like breathing oxygen, and he'd circle them and talk about how like they have to catch their breath, they have to breathe, because breath is what makes us go. Breath is the wind in the sails of life. And one time at a beach hotel, Stephanie and I, we got to take out a Hobie Cat. A Hobie Cat is a sail-powered catamaran. And they let us do this without any experience and about 30 seconds of instruction. And they just promised they'd come get us if we got in trouble. We were not in America, obviously. Anyway, we didn't immediately get it figured out, but eventually we got it figured out. In that moment, when the wind catches the sail and you can hear it pops as it goes taut, and then the boat jumps forward and you're off. It's intoxicating. But until we figured it out, the Hobie Cat without wind is just a life raft. You're just sitting there. But with the wind, it's alive. And that's what James is getting at when he says the body without the Spirit is dead. Likewise, he says, faith without works is dead. It's not, crucially, non-existent. Faith without works is a thing. It's a common thing, actually, just like dead bodies are a pretty common thing. What's the good of that? Which is actually exactly what James asks in verse 14. What good is it? James's question is rhetorical, but it has an answer, actually. The perceived good of faith by itself is that it makes us a good person. Or if we're going to be more theologically complicated, we'd say that the church has clearly communicated that people are saved by faith in Jesus Christ. And so faith is maintained as like an eternal insurance policy, even after acting like Jesus has been jettisoned as difficult. Now, so I know, perhaps you know too, that this passage has a long history in the long history of arguments in the church over the relative roles of faith and works. And I get all that, and when you want to debate that or talk about that or discuss that, I'm your guy. Let's meet, we'll go to Delaney's, we'll have a beer, we'll hash it out. But this last line in our reading, I think actually is James trying to say something much more concrete about our daily life. I'm going to give you one more example to try and explain. Up above our heads, 254 miles up above our heads actually, is the International Space Station. There are currently 3 human-rated spacecraft that can go to the International Space Station. There's the Russian Soyuz capsule, there's the SpaceX Dragon X capsule, and then there's the Boeing Starliner thing, which has an asterisk because it keeps going and it hasn't yet done it right. But there are 3 of them. Now, to go to the International Space Station, you have to have a very specific docking port on your spacecraft. It's the end of the capsule that's going to connect to the space station, right? And it has a very precise shape and set of attachments. You can download these specifications from NASA's website. They're known as the International Docking System Standard Interface Definitions, and it's a really great read. It includes riveting sections. There's a chapter on the PRT retroreflector field of view orientation and the CVT standoff element roll alignment. But a spacecraft that doesn't have its CVT standoff element roll alignment right doesn't get to go to the International Space Station. Faith is the equivalent to the International Docking System Standard Interface Definition. Perhaps we could call it the Heavenly Docking System Standard Interface Definition. Right? James is saying, great, good, you've got the faith part. But where is your rocket? Where is your rocket? By equating works with spirit, James is saying that what we do is what makes our faith go. It's our rocket. It's the wind in our sails, the breath in our lungs of faith. The works are the thing we do that makes our faith go and grow. When I told you that story at the beginning about the small crack in the side of the mountain leading to this enormous room in the old mine, this is the enormous room I think James is hiding behind this crack. That works are the wind of our faith. If you want to go somewhere as a Christian, you have to intentionally live as a Christian. Jesus never said, take up your cross and admire it. He said, take up your cross and follow. You have to go somewhere. This is why at St. Andrew's, our hands and feet outreach programs get so much attention. It's not so we can get ourselves into heaven with our good works. It's so that every single person has the opportunities, as best as we can provide them, to make their faith go, to come alive. And I'll tell you what, the very best part of my life of faith in the last week was at Climb, which is the after-school program we do at Merritt, the housing complex, on Thursday afternoon. And the bus drops the kids off in front, and they came around the building, and they saw us. And they were like, you're back! You're back! And they came running across the field, and they jumped on us and gave us high fives and fist bumps. And it was great. There's a moment where I could feel the wind hit my sail, But it's not just the hands and feet sort of works. Our reading from James, there's a lot about that kind of work. There are also a lot of verses missing, if you look. James has a broader perspective on it as well. Right? We work by providing rides, by being part of the pastoral ministries in the parish, by showing up at church events, by our children's church teachers, our committee members, our lay leaders. Why does James do this? Why does he equate body with faith and spirit with works? Because the animating component, the life-giving element of our faith is our works. If your faith feels stagnant, if you're not sure what it's about or where you're going, try doing something intentionally as a Christian. Try a work. Find a hands and feet opportunity. Serve in worship or as a teacher or in flowers. Make a step in your pledge this next year. Visit friends in the hospital. Volunteer with a nonprofit. Don't mishear me. Don't do it so you can get into heaven. But do it so you can catch the wind of the Holy Spirit in the sail of your faith. So that your faith can live and move and grow and go. Amen.